Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show, and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Michael Greenberg. He is the CEO over at Call for Content. Michael, how you doing today, man?
Logan, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. It's great to talk to another person in marketing here in Colorado. We're finally getting out of the snow, which lasted way into May for us this year. And the sun is actually shining, or at least it is off and on today. So I'm doing fantastic, man. I am really excited to talk with you today about some very specific steps that people can take to leverage authority marketing. Before we do that, I would love for you to give listeners a little bit of context on yourself and what you and the team at Call for Content are up to these days, man.
Yeah, so my background is as a B2B growth strategist and consultant. And so I came to marketing through that lens of operational excellence and through technology. Before I was in growth strategy, I did app development. So I'm coming not from the creative side. And at Call for Content, we've started to narrow down to focus on that non-creative business side of podcasting. So not production like you guys, but instead, how do we grow our audience for an existing show? Or more importantly, how do we get placed on other shows? Mm-hmm. And our background as a company is in B2B content marketing. And we developed a strategy called authority marketing, which is focused around using content to position yourself within a very niche, high-value market for your business. Yeah. And so it's a marketing strategy that's designed to complement and work with sales, not purely alone.
Yeah. Absolutely. So many of our guests have been talking about, the power of sales and marketing working together. Alignment has been, a buzzword for a bit now. But as you point out there, when they are working together, there can be a lot of power in that strategy. So we're going to be talking about some steps to execute, what you mentioned here, authority marketing. I think it warrants us taking a step back real quick. How do you guys define authority marketing, Michael? Let's give people some context who don't necessarily have a clear definition in mind when they hear that term authority marketing.
Yeah. So authority marketing is a marketing strategy designed to position you as the expert in your niche high value field. And it's specifically done using a combination for us of partnerships and content creation. And the core foundation for that is deep customer research.
Yeah, if you're going to go after, as you mentioned, a highly targeted niche market, which, people like Christopher Lochhead and others have been advocating for, I think with very good reason, then you have to start with understanding what is that market. So really in these kind of 4 steps of going after an authority marketing approach, the first is to identify your target market, right?
Exactly. And the best way we've seen to do that is by finding your favorite customers. Mm-hmm. So those who pay well, pay on time, and are easy sells, have a faster sales cycle than other groups. So that's normally because they have some sort of education or those buzzwords that you're trying to sell into already exist in their market. And so you start by looking at those. And what we try to do is develop a specific persona based off of a specific example of a person. So the personas that we use at Call for Content are based off of old clients and they still have their names. So Kai is, Kai that we worked with 2 years ago. And Ruben is Ruben, the executive coach that we're still working with today.
Mm-hmm.
And so we try to personalize those down to the single person and build 3 or 4 for that market. And for the total addressable size of that market, we're generally looking around 10,000, maybe a little lower.
Mm-hmm. So tell us why this approach of going to a specific person to build this persona that is still going to have a lot of attributes that maybe you pull from multiple people, but starting in on one person as opposed to trying to draw from the masses.
Yeah. So one, it works really well for an enterprise sale or something like that, where you may only have 1 or 2 clients. So it works well for companies with high ticket, small client numbers. And 2, because at least in my experience, those people are much more similar to each other that you're selling to than you initially think. And we tend to get better results, especially once we start moving to ads, by having these very specific people that we can build personas and interest profiles off of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So the next step from there, once you build those personas and you start with some existing clients, is to start creating content for those personas. What are some of the next steps? I know from an overall perspective, most marketers understand that next step, but what are some of the do's and don'ts that you see, can make this next step really effective or ineffective as marketers are going through this thought process, Michael?
Yeah. So number one thing is matching your content to your market. If you're selling into the 60 plus C-suite, the podcast is probably not the way to do that. But if you're selling into, say, a middle market tech company, then Sweetfish Media producing a podcast is potentially your best option out there. Because a millennial and Gen Xer executive with a college degree in technology is almost assuredly going to be listening to shows. So that's number one, is matching the kind of content to your audience. But then beyond that, I try from day one to bring the audience into the content creation process. And so that might be having a podcast where you can interview some of them on air, or that might be reaching out before you publish your first ebook and finding out, if we were going to publish one end-to-end how-to guide for you guys, what would you like it to be?
Mm-hmm.
And so since we have these personas, we're able to reach out to specific people and specific organizations to find out what that content they're looking for looks like. And then once we have these ideas of topics, we can scrub away some of the organization specific details and publish them to the general audience.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that idea. We talk about the idea of content-based networking in how you can collaborate to create content with people from your target market in the relationships that builds. But it also, as you're pointing out here, Michael, sets you up to create better content because you're not just in the silo in a dark room trying to hack away at a blog post or a how-to or whatever, format of content you're trying to build. And, fingers crossed, hoping and praying that it resonates with your target market. You go to them and have these conversations about what they think about, what they care about, the struggles that they're dealing with. It's just a more effective way to develop that content. So, everyone listening knows that we're big fans of interviewing people from your target market on your podcast. And as you point out here, it is wildly effective, whether that's a podcast or any other, form of content. It doesn't have to necessarily be a podcast, but I love the benefits that you're talking about there. You guys focus as well, Michael, on how to rank that content. Once you get into a steady stream of producing this content, you've identified your market, you've built some buyer personas off of initial clients and real people, like some of the folks you've mentioned here, and then start to create content with and for them. Tell us a little bit about this next step as you try to increase the rank of that content after each Google update.
Yeah, so we focus on partnerships, and those can take a number of forms, but content partnerships are probably the most common ones that we do. So that's reaching out and either I include inviting somebody on your podcast as a content partnership because I feel like it really is coming together to create content.
Mhm.
But beyond that, looking at webinars and blog posts and other ways that we can work with this audience in longer term partnerships. So beyond a single piece of content, we want to do a series with you over the next 3 months. And that helps us build that link profile that's going to allow Google to recognize. And the way we talk about that is borrowing authority.
Mhm.
So when you partner with somebody else and when you guys get to commingle your presence and Google picks up on that commingling, it's going to realize, oh, this guy who's an expert in podcasts thinks this guy might also be kind of an expert in podcasts.
Mhm.
And it'll break down, okay, we have these combinations where this guy's talking about these things related to this, and this guy's talking about this whole other area, but I see the overlap. And
Mhm.
it's in that you're able to start securing a long-term presence by establishing yourself through social signals
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
much as through technical ones.
Yeah, man, I love where you're going here. We talk a lot, as I said, about content-based networking and the way that it helps you build relationships. But then you've also talked about the way that it helps you create better content. And then, downstream, it's helping you build authority, not just relationally, but technically in your SEO efforts, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it really comes back to if you take a social network nerd, like somebody who's a PhD in social network analysis,
Yeah.
and you ask them how to develop a content marketing strategy, I think they're going to end somewhere closer to this than anything else.
Hmm. Yeah, I love this overlap in how you're showing authority marketing and the steps you can take there, and really how that kind of plays nicely with the concept that we've developed here in content based networking. Not really developed, we've just tried to put a name to it. There are a lot of people doing it in a lot of different formats, podcasting and otherwise. What are some of the other growth strategies beyond that you recommend to marketers, founders at early stage companies, or entrepreneurs as you guys work with folks, Michael?
Yeah. So definitely having a podcast is fantastic. I can't recommend that enough. But outside of that, email, like just plain old cold email, it still works.
Mhm.
We're in the US, so we have easy can spam compliance to maintain, and it's a very valuable avenue to develop lead generation. When we look at content, we've really started to focus on ads as one of the primary drivers of traffic to the content we put out. And so that's been not something I was expecting to see, but it's been very effective, especially for that early stage group that has no real traction yet. Outside of maybe one client, we can build that persona. If we've done the research, it's very easy to build that persona or lookalike audience with ads and then go after that market with a few pieces of content.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially, a lot of marketers have been through the ups and downs of Facebook ads, but especially now in B2B, you've got to dedicate some budget to it, but the targeting that you can get with LinkedIn ads is just unbelievable. And especially, like you said, if you start with your authority marketing strategy and your content based networking strategy of really defining that target market and really knowing those buyer personas, then you're going to set yourself up for success with these other strategies that you're talking about. If you miss the mark there, then that little angle can set you off on a real wayward course once you're 500 miles out to sea, right? So I
Oh,
think the
yeah.
importance of those first steps can't be reiterated enough that you talked about towards the top of the conversation.
Thanks. Yeah. And to put that in perspective, I've gone in and audited now multiple companies where they'll spend 100 or 200,000 in ads without the proper targeting in place. And so when I come into audit, I get to say your marketer doesn't know what they're doing.
That's a fun conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah, as a consultant, it's the best one you can be having. But LinkedIn ads, and in particular, I'd recommend LinkedIn sponsored in mail if you want to get started with the LinkedIn ads quickly. That's one where you can write a letter, toss $500 or $1,000 behind it, and get a campaign out in the same day.
Yeah, very targeted. Got to have something to put towards it, but like you said, pretty quick ramp time with something there versus other ad platforms where you've probably got to develop some more creative to go behind it, because I think that's where a lot of ad campaigns fall flat as well, as the creative is just off the mark. So, but that's probably a whole other conversation. I love the methodical approach you're talking about here, Michael. Like I said, from the top of really identifying your target market, identifying what your ICP looks like. I think a lot of marketers struggle with that ideal, and we just look at what is our potential customer profile. Well, it could be this, it could be this. As you mentioned, who are the people that you like working with? They close faster, they pay on time, they really see the value in your service. It feels limiting, but as we're talking about here, you're going to see much more. You're going to be able to resonate with that audience as opposed to just trying to reach the masses when you niche down and focus. And then these steps of building your authority marketing, using some content-based networking, which we're obviously big fans of. I just love the way that you've broken this down and talked about it very methodically here. Michael, anything you'd like to leave listeners with, either on this idea of collaborating with your market to create content or building your authority before we head out today?
On the topic of collaborating with your market to create content, even if nobody listens to your podcast, you can still repurpose it and turn it into blogs and ebooks and full-length books that people might actually check out. And so I really love audio as your first step on your content train.
Yeah, as you know, Michael, and a lot of people in our network know, we're big fans of starting with that audio because it's just a lower barrier to entry to create. And there are a lot of people who, aren't necessarily great writers, but they have a lot of great things to say. They're great at holding a conversation and extracting valuable content out of the people in their target market. So I just love that starting point. Obviously, we're big advocates of it here at Sweetfish, but it's great to hear you say that as well. And again, I just love the step-by-step approach that you're talking about here to build authority in your market. Michael, if anybody listening to this would like to ask you any follow-up questions on authority marketing or any other topic, or stay connected with you or any of the content that you guys are putting out at Call for Content, what's the best way for them to reach out, man?
So the best way to reach out is to find me at callforcontent.com. I have office hours every week where you can come in and ask me whatever you want. And then I get some great questions to create content off of later.
There you go.
Or you can find me on social media at Gentoftech, GENTOFTECH.
I love it. Michael, this has been a great conversation, man. I always love talking strategy with someone who's so like-minded, and it sounds like we share a lot of the same beliefs in how you can create content for your target market. And again, love the way you broke it down very step-by-step for listeners today. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.